quick and easy sandwich loaf out of fresh milled flour. Let me show you how I make it.
But I finally have a recipe that I can consistently make each week for our sandwich loaf. So I've been grinding my own wheat for a little over a year now, and it is definitely a learning curve dealing with the fresh milled flour. This is my go-to sandwich loaf each week when I don't have time to make a sourdough loaf, but a sourdough recipe is coming, so like and subscribe now to see that video. I start by milling 500 grams of wheat berries. I typically use 50% hard red and 50% hard white wheat berries. If you're new to fresh milled flour, you may want to use 75% white. I measure out 350 grams of water, but that is just a guide. I go by the look and feel of the dough when I'm adding the water. Then to my Nutrimil Artiste mixer, I'm going to add half of the flour and half of the water. And I am using the Nutrimil Artiste. I started with a KitchenAid. I will say, since I started using the Nutrimil Artiste, that my bread is definitely a better quality loaf. On speed 2, I will let that just mix until the water hydrates that flour and it completely pulls away from the bowl, and then I will just stop it to let it hydrate that flour. I usually let it set for about 15 to 20 minutes. And because I'm using active dry yeast, not instant yeast, I'm going to go ahead, while I'm waiting on my flour to hydrate, I'm actually going to go ahead and bloom my yeast, and I'm going to do that in my stand mixer, not in a separate bowl. So I will go ahead and add just a drop of honey in the bottom, and then I will add a little bit more of that water, and then I will add 7 grams of yeast. While I'm waiting on my yeast to bloom, I'm going to go ahead and add some of my other wet ingredients. I'm going to add 1 egg. I'm going to add 21 grams or 1 tablespoon of honey and 28 grams or 2 tablespoons of oil, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Then once our yeast has bloomed, you can see that it's become foamy in the bowl, so we know that our yeast is good. I'm going to go ahead and add most of that flour and the rest of that water, but I'm going to hold a little bit of that flour back just in case we need to add it. Again, we're going to look at the dough and feel the dough. And after we add that flour, I'm going to add in 10 grams of salt. I'm going to turn that mixer on speed 2 again, and I'm just going to let it mix until again it pulls away from the sides of the bowl, and then I'm going to stop it to fill the dough. What I'm looking for is a dough that is not real sticky, but I do want it to be very moist, a little bit more moist when you're using a commercial flour. Then after filling the dough, I decided to add a little bit more water and a little bit more flour to get it exactly where I wanted it. Again, fresh milled flour does have a learning curve, but the more loaves you make, you will begin to figure out just how hydrated you want your dough. I like my dough just a little bit tacky because as it kneads, it will smooth out. So I decided this was pretty perfect, so I went ahead and turned it back on speed 2. I'll put the lid on it, and I'll let this knead for somewhere between, depending on the day, anywhere from like 8 to 14 minutes till I get the window pane. After about 10 minutes of kneading, I like to start checking it to see if we've reached the window pane stage or not. using my KitchenAid stand mixer, I was never able to reach the window pane stage, so switching to the Artiste definitely gives me that window pane. I like to wet my hands and just take off a piece of the dough and then check to see, and as you can see here, we have a nice window pane which tells us that our dough is completely kneaded. After we've decided that it's done kneading, we're going to transfer that to a bowl and cover it with some plastic wrap and let it set from anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour depending on the temperature of your kitchen. A lot of times I like to put it in my oven with the light on in the oven to go ahead and let it proof. So after our dough has proofed, we're going to go ahead and dump that out. I like to use this mat and some of the other things that I used in this video. I'll leave a link down in the description below of this mat, but you can put that on your counter. I like to wet my hands. I do wet my mat just a little bit. I do not like to add any more flour to this. Again, fresh milled flour likes to be hydrated, and if you add flour here, you can dry your dough out and make it dense. And then I like to, once I have my dough flattened out into a rectangle, I like to bring the outer edges in and start rolling that into a log to form my loaf. And as you can see, because this is a very hydrated, nice loaf, but it's not sticking to my fingers because I have wet my hands. The dough was kneaded very well, it proofed well. So even though it is very hydrated, it's very easy to work with. I like to pinch together the dough on the ends and in the seam just to be sure that we get that good and closed, and as it proofs it will close and seal all of that off. I have a buttered loaf pan here, and this is the USA bread pan. I use a 9x5 and an 8x4, so I've done this loaf in both sizes. I do butter my pan, but have never stuck a loaf in one of these USA bread pans. Then I'm just going to score the top of the loaf, cover it with plastic wrap, and we're going to let that set again 25 to 45 minutes depending on the temperature of your kitchen. And you want that rise to be just at the rim or a little bit above the rim of the loaf pan. I had some hamburger buns proofing as well, so check out that video. When your loaf is just about proof, you're going to preheat your oven to 400. When you go into the oven to bake it, we're going to turn it down to 350, and we're going to let that cook for 30 to 35 minutes. I like for the temperature of my bread to be around 190 to 205 is about the temp of where I like to pull. Then I immediately turn the loaf out onto a cooling rack and let it cool for several hours before I cut into it, my bread out of the oven. And as you can see, we got a pretty good rise out of that loaf in the oven. And we're just going to let that cool for a few hours.
So this bread's been cooling a few hours now. So if you can see how soft that bread is, we're going to cut into it and let you get a look at it. And I always cut my ends off and I toast those, and then I put them in my little mini cup on my Ninja blender, and I blend those up for fresh breadcrumbs when I need them. I just keep them in the freezer. And look at that. You can see how soft that is. It's just about perfect. It took me a while to learn the fresh milled flour, but once you understand how the flour reacts, you can make delicious, healthy bread with the whole grains. regular flour recipes to fresh milled flour recipes. There you have an everyday sandwich loaf, and you can see how soft that is. Guaranteed the family will love it.